A fixed mindset believes that who I am is who I will always be. Feedback is bad and things to be avoided. Challenges are things to run from. Skills can't be developed, I'm always gonna be this way, where a growth mindset is feedback helps me improve. Who I am is not who I always have to be. I can develop skills through intentionality and reps and things like that. Leadership is incredibly lonely at times because the higher you go, the less other people can relate to the responsibility. Leadership has burdens at times. You have to make hard decisions that aren't gonna make everybody happy. And if you don't have other people in your network who have made those hard decisions who you can talk to, you feel like you're all alone in a battle against a Goliath.
Small blocks can build epic things. What small blocks have built epic things in your life?
Man, I would say.
Before we jump into this episode, I'd love to invite you to be a part of the community where you can listen to more content to help you be a smarter, stronger, and better equipped, successful leader. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I would love and appreciate your support. It's amazing to me to watch the community grow and read all of your comments each and every week. I can't wait to go on the journey with you. Thank you so much, and it means the world to me. All right, welcome, guys. Jake, you just got off stage. We're here at Impact Driven Leader Summit 2024. We just had a question from the audience. We were talking about Carol Dweck and mindset. I remember when I first learned of that book. You're actually going to meet the person on Wednesday as part of our coaches workshop who told me about the book, Mike Nielsen. But for those listening and for the rest of the audience here, tell us about Carol's book and how that kind of really sunk to you and like really moved you.
Yeah, so funny, I think it was in our book club too. That we did. I think it was in the book club. So Dweck was a researcher. She was studying why certain students had success and came up with this concept of a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Now, what it really is just our belief system. What do we believe is possible? And so a fixed mindset believes that who I am is who I will always be. Feedback is bad and things to be avoided. Challenges are things to run from. Skills can't be developed, I'm always gonna be this way, where a growth mindset is feedback helps me improve. Who I am is not who I always have to be. I can develop skills through intentionality and reps and things like that. And when Dweck studied these students, what she saw is even the kids early on who did well, were quote smart, would trail off throughout their life because they put their whole identity in this fixed mindset and being smart versus the growth mindset of how do I grow, how do I improve? And so it's really fascinating. What turned me onto her work is Ashley Merriman, who wrote a book with her co-author called Nurture Shock. And so Ashley and them wrote a book called Top Dog that I read that's the science of competition and winning and losing. So if you like any of that stuff, like it's a huge nerd dive book, but awesome on how men and women and everybody competes differently in groups and individuals. But they started doing research on why certain kids did better than others. And the study specifically talked about children and how we praise our kids. And when they studied Group A was praised for outcomes, hits, wins, goals scored, everything that was outcome-based. Group B was praised for effort, coachability, attitude, how you responded to failure. And what they found is Group A started to associate mom and dad's love with outcome. So when I go 0 for 4 at the plate, they love me less than when I go 4 for 4. And so that opened up this whole other world of research around the importance of praising process and what's in the control. What I'm still doing and trying to find is how adults have changed, because some of the research is in conflict now of us and where we are at this stage in life of it's a little bit different. But I still am under the belief that we're all children at heart. And so as leaders, getting into the habit of praising process, consistency, attitude, coachability, responding to setbacks is crucial for our culture and the cultures we build versus just praising, did you get the sale? Congrats on the promotion, all of that, because we associate importance with what's rewarded and praised.
Okay.
There we go.
Look at that mindset. There's a comment that you made as you were presenting, and I actually wrote this myself. The only race we will ever lose is when we run someone else's race. You commented about that almost to the different, you used a track analogy. Would you expound that a little bit based upon your experience or just like a little bit deeper?
Yeah. So, I mean, I tried to run everybody else's race a lot of my life. And I'll be honest, like it's hard not to, right? As a speaker, like I have other friends who are speakers, and it's hard not to look at them and be like, why am I not having that success? I got to do what they do. I need to do what they do. And when we do that, we fail to take advantage of the talents and abilities we've been blessed with. And I don't mean it in a way of like resting on those talents, but like we all have natural things that we're better at. And when we try to run somebody else's race, we negate what our advantage is in life. Some of us are better writers than verbal communicators. And if we only try to be a verbal communicator, we take away our ability to write, right? And so what happens is when we run somebody else's race, we're never going to win because they're better to run their race than we are. Just like would be entirely different trying to be just like you. And putting all my self-worth just like you, or like Graham, or like Katie, or anybody else, versus when you learn you compete with yourself, when you really sink this into your bones of like, my worth is not in how I compete with someone else, but how I do compared to myself yesterday, and I'm going to take pride every day in getting better, then I can look at you, like I said this morning, is like, hey, I just want to pick your brain on some of the business stuff. I'm not intimidated. I'm not overwhelmed. I've got a friend, and we know him, Alan Stein. Alan is another keynote speaker, very similar. He wears Jordans. He does a lot of sports stories.
He's got blonde hair now.
He has blonde hair now.
Like platinum, like white.
Platinum blonde hair now. But Alan and I laugh because like we go up against each other all the time for gigs. And people are like, oh, do y'all not like each other? And somebody asked me that, and I laughed. And I was like, well, actually, I sent Alan 2 gigs last year, and he sent me a couple as well. Like, we refer each other business. And he's like, why would you help him? And my thought is like, because I'm not in competition with him. I'm all about how do I serve these people? And if Alan's a better fit to serve you right now, great. But I've told Alan, like, when we're at the same event, I'm still competitive. You're going to go on stage, and I'm going to sit in the front row, and I'm going to take notes, and I'm going to cheer. And if I see something, hey, you should try this, or hey, here's something awesome that's going to help you get better, I'm going to tell you. But the moment I step on stage, I want them to forget you. Like, I'm very much going to be like, how do I bring my best to this moment? But as soon as that ends, that performance, quote, ends, it's all about how do we get better together? What did you learn? How do I learn? And so it's that growth mindset. It's the idea that there's room enough for all of us to win. Like, there is plenty of room. This is not the Olympics where one person gets on the platform and the podium.
How old were you when you started to understand that? Like, I know for me, as you're sharing this story, and it's interesting, Graham, who's in the back of the room, he just spent a weekend with this guy. I learned that probably about 5 years ago when I spent a weekend with Rory Vaden, and helping me understand that I have one problem that I solve. I have one problem, and that's it. And so I can stand here and say, hey, my problem is not your problem, and your problem is not my problem. So I understand. When was that for you?
You know, I remember, as I shared, like early in the business, trying to do what everybody else did, doing it wrong. You only get so many times you beat your head against the wall doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome where you're like, this is pretty insane, right? And so that was a big awakening, but I think a lot of it had to go back to my coach. So I trained when I started speaking. I hired a coach, went through his program, and I remember one day being really frustrated. And I was feeling like I had traction, but it was also I was staring at where I wasn't. I was getting that distraction, just like we all do, because when you're in the growth part and you're in the mess and you see somebody else doing it well, it's very easy not to let that focus go. And I looked at him and I was like, man, I'm looking at like Lewis Howes and Inky Johnson and John and all these people. And I'm like, I don't have those stories. Like, I've never been homeless, never had a major issue. Like I was an embarrassed, like I walked away from college football. Like I did something wrong. Like I don't have anything crazy. How am I going to do this? And I remember my coach looking at me and smiling. And he said 2 things that I'll never forget. And the first he said is, how many people in your audience have that exact same story? Like, how many people in your audience are dealing with the homelessness and the drug addiction and all that? Or he said, how many people in your audience are just trying to be a great parent and want to do work and don't want to regret the extra promotion they took and show up for their spouse and get through life? And I remember him saying that of like, man, like most of us are going through the same thing. Like, how can I not try to be like them and just say, here's what I'm going through. Here's what I've learned. Here's how to do it. And then the other thing he said that I think has always stuck with me, that I think is vastly underestimated by leaders, is the power of our words. And he pulled me aside, and like I said, I'm super early. I'd done like maybe 3 talks. And he said, I have high expectations for you. Now, Michael had seen me do some talks. He'd seen me practice, but like, this is a guy that's worked with some of the best of the best. And when you're a leader and you speak potential into someone's life, you completely change their perspective of what's possible. Because for some of us, the people that work for us, that work alongside us, that we go to church with, that we hang out with, somebody's never told them they're proud of them or that they have high expectations of them. And when you suddenly realize you have a higher ceiling than maybe you thought, that limiting belief starts to fade and you start to behave differently to live up to the potential someone else sees in you.
I want to transition a little bit. You have a little guy in your pocket. That sounds weird. It's his Lego. And as you were talking about that, small blocks can build epic things. What small blocks have built epic things in your life?
Man, I would say consistency in taking care of myself physically has been a big one.
But that's been a massive change.
It's been a massive change, but it was the small block of just going. And then for me, the small block of getting out, I got super competitive in CrossFit for years. If anybody ever did CrossFit, it's drinking the Kool-Aid. And so for me, a small block was reprogramming, getting out of having to be in that ultra competitive and still being okay. Small blocks for me are morning routines. Gospel song. Here we got something.
We just got to own it. Like, it's all right, guys. How can we use that?
Yeah, like small blocks. So for me, it's little choices every day. So it's morning routines and intentionality. It's making the choice to not hole up in a hotel room as a speaker and be at events. Like, that's a big one from a business standpoint, because relationships drive opportunities. And so just being around, talking to people, adding value. And that doesn't seem like a big deal. Yeah, you finish, you go to your room. Like, I love after I finish a talk to have a martini and not talk to anybody. Like, that's just the only child recover. But making the choice of like, hey,
that's an introvert. Like, my wife just stepped out, but that is something that Kelly would embrace. Yeah. Absolutely.
And so it's just, how do I go out there? The little, I just try to look at what are the little steps every day that are going to help me grow without realizing like I have to have an immediate payout. So little blocks of investing in relationships, like continuing to follow up with you, right? Staying connected for us, even though like I was super impressed when you joined the book club, because I was like, this guy's doing a lot of stuff. Like, what's he doing in this book club with like 15 other people that I have no idea how to orchestrate? And like, we've stayed connected. So little blocks of not waiting to find time, not waiting to find time for relationship building. Being intentional, putting things on calendars is a big one. I've got a buddy, we have a standing every month. We go get a glass of tequila and it's a life check. And it's like, tell me how your family is, tell me how your kids are, where can I pray for you, where can I support you, where are you stuck? And we have those conversations, and like, both of us are busy. He's got 2 kids in sports. Those of you sports parents, like, it never ends. I don't have kids, I have 3 dogs. And so for both of us, it's an intentional building block. Journaling, investing in relationships. Like, I just try to look at it as most times we set the goal, whatever our goal is, annual sales, grow as a leader. And then we stare at the gap and we never get there because it's overwhelming. And so when I talk Lego blocks, it's always, how can I break this down into the smallest piece that at least moves me forward? So even on the day that 3 flight delays, another flight canceled, got to have a rental car, this day's terrible, but I got this thing done, I can at least go to bed confident I moved the needle. And so James Clear talks about this with the idea of the 2-minute rule, right? Set a timer for 2 minutes. At the end of 2 minutes, if you want to stop, stop. Most times you're going to keep going. For me, that's a Lego block. Whatever that looks like for you, whether it's, I want to start a quiet time in the morning, I want to start journaling, I want to start reading, I'm not a reader. Where can I trade? For me, another one that was super helpful when I started the apparel company is I drove the US. So I loaded up a truck or a Sprinter van. I worked expos, CrossFit games, races, slinging tees. But when I was in the car, I audiobooked or I podcast versus the radio. And that's not, and some of us have like a 20-minute commute every day. We're like, I can't get through that audio, but it's 12 hours. But if you did that 20 minutes one way, 20 minutes, 40 minutes a day, it stacks. That's why, as we laughed at the beginning, the reading the books, right? I used to make a joke in keynotes of how many people would join my book club if we do 30 books a year. And I get like 2 hands. because nobody wants to read 30 books. That's a lot of reading. That's a lot of investment. I'm not ready for that level of commitment with you, Jake. But then I break it down and say, cool, what if we read 10 minutes a day? Like, who would be up for 10 minutes a day? You can usually get about half the room. Well, think about it. If you read 10 minutes a day, you'd get about a chapter a day based on the average number of chapters in personal development, professional development, leadership books. If you read a chapter a day every day, you'd read 36 books a year. But you don't do that by focusing on the big one. You focus on what's the 10 minutes today. And so that's how I try to look at everything. Can't work out what's the 10 minutes I can do. And so when you take that mentality, I think I heard John's team just talk about like the bare minimum, like something around what's the minimum to keep the streak going. It's the same with us. Like, what's the one block that if you lay today is not going to build your skyscraper, but it's going to put you closer to having it built?
Two things that I want to cover before our time here is done, and they're really important. And the first one is, you mentioned the idea of defining values. You had everyone in the room list off their values included. That reminds me of something the Maxwell Company has done. When John wrote the book, Change the World, it was all about values and sitting down. And there's people in this room that have done that with me where we sat at a round table and we talked about the values. And it was mind-blowing, the experience. So much that John and his company has it constructed. They use it internationally, but they use it in schools now, because that very thing that you mentioned is people can have consistency on the wall. And yet we have 90 or so people in this room, we'll find 90 different answers. How important is it, as you've seen, as you've gone through that, for leaders to take the time and intentionally with people on their team to define those 4, 5, 6 core values? And when they do, what that does?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of the things I see it does is it cuts down frustration in conversations. Because, for example, if one of our core values is great customer service, and your definition is like the Ritz-Carlton stuffed animal. If anybody has heard this story, Jay Baer tells it, but like a kid left a stuffed animal at a Ritz, and the Ritz took the stuffed animal around the resort taking pictures as they mailed it back to the kid. And so the little elephant went to the pool and went to the spa and hung out at the bar, like did all of this. And then they sent the stuffed animal back. Like, that is great experience. Where somebody on your team's like, well, I just remembered their name and got the order right. And so what happens is we create conflict when there's an absence of us being aligned. Tony Dungy talked about this in his book, but John Lynch, Hall of Famer, played for him. And Lynch, during one of their seasons in Tampa, they have a great team. And Lynch comes up to Dungy and is like, hey, are we playing your defense right? Like, are we getting this right? And Dungy's like, yeah, y'all are doing phenomenal. And John said, we wouldn't know it because you're not communicating it with us. Like, we have expectations, oh, you're doing it. And so we're not going to say anything because you're supposed to do your job, versus how do I make sure that you're very clear on you're meeting the expectations of our values and standards and living it up. And so for us,
That's good.
In the absence of language, in the absence of communication, negativity always fills. And so when we get out of alignment as leaders and we have conflict, and your employee is like, hey, I'm working hard, and you're like, you're not working that hard, it's because you have two different definitions of what it means to work hard. And so defining it, creating examples of it, very clear as day. And then the beauty is what we just talked about with the kids on growth mindset, praising it. When you see it done, praise it. Call out the good. Catch people living in process and values and live that. Because what that does is people suddenly start feeling seen. And when you feel seen, you want to be part of a team because you feel appreciated. We know that 71% of people that left their jobs between 2021 and 2023 did so because they felt underappreciated by their direct manager. They left without another job in hand because the person they report to did not appreciate or give them feedback. How do we solve that? We give more consistent feedback every day, every week. And we do that by praising values and when people are living up to it or where there's an opportunity. But we can't do that unless we define it. And so that goes back to the idea of we've got to be on the same page. I'll honestly say, even for me, like, I've always had an idea of my values, but it wasn't until I sat down and went through that exercise myself of like, I'm taking teams through this for their company. When am I doing this more for me? That it very clearly helped my decision making. Because what it allowed me to do is just like the yellow bug you see everywhere. I start seeing opportunities. Am I living in alignment with who I say I want to be, or am I not? And I have to make a choice right there to say, am I moving toward who I want to become, or am I going against it? And so that actually puts us in a right spot to say, is this really a value? If I'm not going to live into it and try to grow and develop it, maybe it's not as important to me. And if it is, and I'm not living into it, how do I change those actions?
Last one. And I'm going to ask for some audience participation here.
Let's go.
You made a comment. Leadership can be lonely, but it shouldn't be. How many people in this room, show of hands, please participate, believe that leadership is lonely? Okay, there's maybe 20, 30 people. Very bold statement. You're not going to hear many bold statements. You're going to hear this bold statement. If leadership is lonely, you're doing it wrong. If leadership is lonely, you're doing it wrong. I've done it wrong. Leadership was lonely. I want you to expound on that.
Yeah, so a lot of times we get folks, think about it in your career and your organization. When you go from performer to leader, you're on the same level with other managers and leaders. So you have other peers that you can relate to, you can talk to. You go up another level, there's far less. As you climb within organizations, you eventually get to the C-suite and you become a CEO or president or the owner of a company, and you don't have direct peers within that organization. You can't, just like your managers, you can go to another manager and talk about a problem, but when you're the CEO, you don't really want to go down to the manager and talk about a C-suite level problem. And what happens a lot of times is we don't invest in outside relationships because we're busy. We've got family, we've got work, we have all this other stuff. We don't have time to connect with other leaders outside of our organization. And so leadership is incredibly lonely at times because the higher you go, the less other people can relate to the responsibility, the burden you have to, leadership has burdens at times. You have to make hard decisions that aren't going to make everybody happy. And if you don't have other people in your network who have made those hard decisions, who you can talk to, you feel like you're all alone in a battle against a Goliath. And that is overwhelming. And so I say leadership is lonely because I think for most people, leadership is incredibly lonely because as they grow, they see less people around them. Now, what I will say is it's no different than high performers. If you want to be great, the more choices you make to grow and improve, the less people that are going to be around you that are making the same choices. And so it can be lonely. And there are people like within our network that as you start growing, you realize the relationships in my life are not the relationships I need 5 years from now in my life. They're just not growing with me. And so it can feel lonely making that transition, which is why I pled with everybody the cheat code. Like, you've got to network with other people to just say, man, I'm going through this and I don't know anybody I'm hanging out with on a daily or weekly basis that is even wanting to improve. I don't know the last time I talked to somebody about a great book they read lately. Like, it's all about complaining. Like, then who do I go to? And so high performance leadership is all incredibly lonely unless we're intentional about who we connect with, and then we follow through with it.
I like how you changed that. You said network, you changed it to connect. I
connect,
appreciate
there you
that.
go.
It's good. It's a vernacular you have to change. And once you hear it, I mentioned earlier from Brad, it like totally changes your perspective. Yeah. And I agree. Thank you for that. Thank you for this time. Has this been valuable? Did you guys enjoy this? All right.
Thanks, y'all.
Wonderful.